Book by book. Here we are once again at the Quinta Christian Centre in Shropshire, England, bringing book by book and our sixth study in Proverbs. That's the book we're doing. I'm Richard Buse, joined here by Paul Blacker once again, and also by our dear guest and friend, that's George Verwer, who's the founder of Operation Mobilisation and travels extensively, as his jacket shows us. Oh, George, thank you very much for joining us again.
Thank you.
Well, we're coming now to study number 6 and chapters 16 to 18. Let me read from verses 1 to 3 of 16. To man belongs the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the reply of the tongue. All a man's ways seem innocent to him, but motives are weighed by the Lord. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. Or verse 25, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. So we can never forget, as we read these words, we're thinking about the way of the righteous committed always to the Father. And of course Jesus did that always, walked the way of life and truth in dedication to the Father's will. So let's take up again a sentence we looked at earlier. Therefore, verse 25, there is a way that appears to be right, that leads to death. Paul, when we think about it, the wicked way seems to many so right, even though it'll lead to death. Why is that? And why is this theme so strong?
Well, Jesus gets us into this in his own teaching, how that there is a deep problem of the human heart, right underneath everything, that there's a kind of a selfishness or a wickedness in the human heart, and that produces everything else. And this chapter is so real and honest about, well, even just things like in verse 26, the labourer's appetite works for him, his hunger drives him on. People are driven on because of their desire or hunger or need. But you see, that need, what do we need? What is it we're hungry for? Like the selfishness of the human heart is like, I need to put myself first and get things for me. And so we're warned, for example, verse 16, how much better to get wisdom than gold, to choose understanding rather than silver. Because inside we're like, what I need is money or pleasure or fame. Or, in surveys, people say that kids, like, what do you aspire to? To be famous, to be a footballer, to be wealthy. And that is the natural human heart response. We think that's the best way.
It's the me-first society.
The me-first society.
It's here already.
And that's why this chapter is realistic to say, yeah, those are the desires of the human heart, and people are driven by those. But right from the beginning, to man belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the reply. And all the way through, verse 3, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. See, if we start from ourselves and commit to myself, like follow my own heart, my own dreams, in a way, the Lord's going to be against me deep down, and that's not going to lead to real lasting life and value and treasure and fruitfulness for eternity. Or verse 9, in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. There is a sovereign God that's beyond this, everything that we see and our drives, and we'll say, I'm in charge of my life. Are we? Are we? And this is the warning to us. Choose wisdom.
We're on to top people here, because this chapter also deals with the way to handle kings or people in authority. Well, I suppose we'd say heads of state, verses 10 to 15. And maybe verse 31 could tell us how to show the right kind of respect and wisdom in dealing with the authorities in this age. To what extent do you agree with that, George?
Well, again, guess my middle name is Struggle, because I've struggled with that concept, though I certainly lean toward submitting to the authority. But I think of countries that are completely committed to evil and to abusing people, and this war going on even now in Syria, which maybe we hope ancient history by the time people are with us. But I think it does seem that there seem to be exceptions when somehow the leader of the nation, his wickedness is so great, God removes him, or somehow in God's mercy and mystery, he allows him to continue, but he shouldn't be there. But I don't put it together. Paul maybe can explain it better than me, because so many nations have been led by such evil people who have destroyed. I mean, what are we going to say about Lenin and Stalin when they led that? What do we say about Adolf Hitler?
I know. But isn't it? I think it's always interesting that those people do always end. Like, they're there, and at the time, they think they're there forever. And they'll sometimes say, I'm setting up an empire that's going to last 1,000 years. And sometimes it doesn't even last 5 years. And then they're often gone overnight. And even in the Bible, we see these terribly powerful empires, and they seem to be there forever. And the church under them is like, Lord, how long? How long? And then it goes, and then they're gone, and they're not a permanent fixture in world history. The Roman Empire is a great example.
Antiochus Epiphanes there in the days of the Greeks. Terrible. He was called the abomination of desolation.
And I think that's so important that if you'd lived in the church in the first century and looked at the Roman Empire, a tyrannical regime that murdered thousands and thousands of people, you couldn't have imagined it would be overthrown. And yet they did. And the martyrs would look into the eyes of emperors and say, you will answer for this one day. And then the Roman Empire is a footnote in history to us. I think that's the important thing. That it's not that these empires disappear instantly, but they do disappear.
They do disappear. I mean, Gandhi said that they always disappear.
They always disappear. But the kingdom of Jesus never disappears. It's the stone that becomes a mountain and sees off all the others. And we are citizens of that. So we can look at the authorities in the world and not be intimidated by them, even if they kill us.
I know. Actually, shifting into chapter 17, the Lord tests the heart. That's verse 3. And in this chapter, it's the way that we deal with one another that somehow should show our quality. So the wise way to handle conflict, I suppose we're looking at verse like 14 when a quarrel starts. These are favourite verses of yours, George. You talked about them in a previous study. Or verse 19, or the perverse heart. Verse 20, contrasted with one of your favourite verses, George. Verse 22, the cheerful heart. So, Paul, how can wisdom bring unity in these situations?
Well, it's that. I love the fact of how much do we value unity over our own pride, say. Because if you remember, there was an earlier proverb that says, it's the wise thing to do to overlook an insult and forget it. Whereas if we're like, nah, I'm not overlooking it, what about me? Well, then that's only going to lead to conflict and problems. Whereas here, verse 1, better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife.
That's quite good.
Isn't it great? It's like that psalm that, how wonderful it is when the brothers live together in unity. It's like oil down the beard. So it's like that value in the church where we live together, and he's showing us to be one, even as the living God is one in the fellowship of the Spirit. That has got to capture our hearts so that we say, no, I'd rather have nothing to eat and live in poverty, but have love and unity with each other, rather than have a massive feast and all the wealth in the world, but be at odds with people. And that comes out through it. It's there in verse 9 as well. He who covers over an offence promotes love, but who repeats the matter separates close friends. Because that's the thing, innit? You'll hear about some disagreement, and then the danger is to go, I'll go and tell everybody else about this argument, or I'll go and tell everybody what this person's done wrong. And the Lord's like, no, don't do that. Try to bring peace, try to bring unity, try to calm the thing down. And it's about that choice to say other people, the community, the love and unity in the church fellowship, that's more important than me and what I like. I like gossip. Yeah, well, put yourself to death and put others first and love and unity first.
Yes. Conflict always. We're aware of it again and again and again. Then the poor and needy are here in this chapter 2, is in verse 5. Again, I think we could ask, how is justice related to wisdom? That's the thing that we might think about, George. I mean, I'm looking at verse 13 or 23, 26. Justice being related to wisdom.
For too long, these verses have been neglected, and many other Old Testament verses. I think we all know the old paradigm is that we just win people to Jesus and we plant churches and we hopefully disciple them. But these other things we often relegate to, say, one organization, Tear Fund will do that, or World Vision. That has changed now, where we're realizing every believer needs to get involved with the poor. Every believer should be concerned about justice. I've read Joseph D'Souza's brilliant book On the Side of Angels. I never dreamed that out of OM's movement would come a book so strong about human rights and justice. Again, they're tough issues and people do easily go to extremes, but we can't run away. It is in the Word of God, and we must somehow get involved. I think it's especially difficult, and I have great sympathy for people in the political arena. And I feel sometimes Christians just get caught up on one or two focuses. There's a huge range of Christian values. And every generation has had some of those values in play and some have not, no matter what part of history we look at. And right now we're losing some key values in some of our so-called Christian nations. I've never believed in that particular theory, but other Christian values are still strong. And in some places, like the way the mentally ill are treated, the way the disabled are treated, there are other areas where things have actually improved, and it can be traced back to the revolution of love of Jesus. And sad that some leaders don't even know where their values came from. And even Gandhi, he never would explain Gandhi without the Christian values that he took. But history seems to be trying to rewrite all of that.
I know. Exactly.
I agree completely. And that's why in verse 26, the thing about integrity of government officials and legal officials, and having just the courage to have integrity and justice in those things, so important, isn't it?
Well, Paul, I think that the people sharing this study with us will be glad of your study guide that accompanies the video that goes out with this particular study, because we can then talk through a little bit in the group or whenever the relationship between the verbal, when we're witnessing, preaching, but the visible, where it has to be shown in the deeds that we do. That seems to be very, very important. But listen, friends, should we go on into chapter 18, rather fast, I'm afraid, where it seems that the tongue, here once again, has the power of life and death. So why is it, friends, that the words of a man's mouth, verse 4, are deep waters? What is it about words that reveals so much about us? We've talked about this before.
No, we haven't. It comes up over and over again in Proverbs because it's all part of the rich pattern of life. Words, works, family, everything's all together. And here we're back to this one. And it's so deep because what we say, I mean, one of the commentators I was reading said speech is the truest indicator of a wise or foolish character. And that does seem to come out in the book of Proverbs. And Jesus says in Matthew 12, 33 and 34, he's talking about a tree is either good or bad, and it produces good fruit or bad fruit. And then in Matthew 12, 34, he says, how out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So what's in your heart is going to show up in what you say. And that is so good because in that verse there that you just read, verse 4, the words of a man's mouth are deep waters, but the fountain of wisdom is a bubbling brook. So that's the idea of if you have a deep pool that's like a stagnant pool and it's dark and you can't see what's in it, and it could be all sorts of suspicious things and rotting things and things like that. And that is like the human heart, but out of that comes bad things that we say. But if instead we've got a fountain of wisdom, that's a bubbling brook, and it's fresh and it's clear and you can see it and you can drink it safely and all that. I love those two images, a dark, deep, stagnant pool that you can't really see what's in it, or a bubbling brook that's safe to drink and you get your spring water from that. And those are the contrasts. The human heart on its own is dark and stagnant, and there's deep things in there, and then they come out in our speech and reveal the problem. Whereas what we want is that fountain of wisdom, the Holy Spirit, forgiveness from Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And then we can speak where we can actually begin to do good with our speech.
The words, we'll let George finish off for us. I mean, I'm looking at verse 13, about the person who answers without really listening, or verse 12, where the compulsive gabbler needs to be questioned. So there may be some wisdom for those of us who jump in too low with a load of dippy equipment and opinions.
Well, I'm guilty again. You know, why do I keep coming out being the guilty one here? Because I answer people before I, really listen to what they're saying. And I've especially failed my wife because I remember once she was going on about something that I actually wasn't interested in. And then she stopped me and said, well, are you listening? And then I was, of course, you're my wife. Naturally, I'm listening. And then it wasn't fair. She said, well, what did I actually say? So typical Verwer loudmouth answer, no, honey, I don't think we should get into the details. So I just want to say here, I hope people with us in this study will not think it's any substitute for reading every verse. Yes. We're just touching, we're hopping around at a tremendous pace through a book that I suggest people sometimes read one a day, 31 days for the month, because just in those chapters we just touched on, they're just truth just jumping out of all different kinds. It jumps around, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're trying to be as systematic as possible, but this thing is just jumping around.
And you can't be systematic in a family. One day it's one thing, next day it's something else, next day you come back to that one thing again. Yeah. So that's exactly what Proverbs is
How
doing.
do you know about my family? I haven't told you that much.
Friends, as we finish off, just think now, how do you manage if you have emails? How do you do emails? What about Twitter? How do you express yourself on those things? I know one email can destroy a single church. It gets multiplied, it gets sent to other people. Within weeks, within even minutes, a church can be divided and wrecked by just a few careless emails. How do we use them? How do we use them? Let's make that a thought for our prayers and our action and our obedience.
Amen.
Join us again, please.